Gary Tucker, who is our demo artist for today. Gary started to make his life path while he was still in high school and studied with Anita Foss. That's Fahs. He was drawn east to Boston, where he met Professor Kaji Aso and learned to do a lot of calligraphy and sumi painting. He graduated to the media of watercolor and found he could achieve more subtlety, power, and expressiveness in his painting. So he's he states that through the media of watercolor and my process of painting, I find power through brushwork and subtlety through transparency. And watercolor differs from other media in that there's a performance aspect to it. The fine pieces come out in one sitting and very often like a classic performance. Something happens, a fusion of mind and subject and an improvisation that cannot be duplicated. So anyway, he's going to show us how he paints the scene of the Senate. I hope you all got a chance to look at it. This big scene with this little kid sand. Anyway, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Does Gary live in California?
No, he's in Boston. It's pretty late for him. So please keep your chats. If you have any questions, put it in the chat and we'll discuss it with him when there's a moment. Most of his presentation is going to be pre-recorded, but if you have questions, he'll stop and we'll answer questions rather than just speaking out. So here's Gary.
Hi, everybody. Can you see me? There
Yes, we go. You got the spotlight.
Can you hear me okay, everyone? Yes, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I always like to double check before I get rolling so that nothing is missed. Yeah, so as Liz said, I live in Boston and I'm in my studio at the moment. I do most of my classes out of here. I teach classes pretty regularly. Typically, I'll teach a 6-week session each season. So we just finished a winter session. We're starting a new one in April. I also have a pretty big YouTube channel posting there on a pretty regular basis, all watercolor, some drawing. So if you're interested in what you see tonight, you can certainly find more of that on the web. I had a really good experience. Was it 2 years ago? I was out in Davisville, Daniel. I can't remember the name of the town now, but we had a great workshop at your facility, and I really enjoyed meeting many of you for that workshop and painting together for a week. The scene that I'm doing today is a seaside scene, but the emphasis is on figures.
Oh, good.
And in fact, I'm going to be doing two things. For those of you who are working along, you'll need 2 pieces of paper. The first part, I'm going to be showing you just some very basic knowledge of the figure, how to work with the figure, and things that we look for as we're starting to place figures on our painting, some strategies for working with figures, and use that as a warm-up. And this is typically how I manage a class: is we do a drill or a warm-up, and then we get into a painting that's related to that drill. So I'll be using a single color. For example, I'm using sepia. I'm using a single brush, which is a sablette with a good point, number 10. And working with the figure basically in my head. So I'm not using a reference for these figures. They're very generic, but that allows me to talk about things like proportion and animation and condensing the figure into a few brush strokes. Then as we get into the demonstration, you'll see that I have an image, and that image will be able to recognize some of the things that we practiced in our our little drill, and apply those very smoothly. So there's a connection between the warm-up and the painting. I'll just run over the materials that I'm using very quickly in case you're following along. So I'm using a combination of brushes, a cat's tongue #4, a couple of flat brushes, Sablette flat brushes, but most of the work is done with these couple of Sablettes, long-haired rounds that are, I think they're 10 and 16. And this is how I do a lot of the figure work that I do because it's very calligraphic. It has a good bounce, and I like these brushes a lot. I'm using a rough surface paper. I like that because I can get some texture out of it when I need it. 140-pound Saunders Waterford taped to a board. My table is basically at 30 degrees, so there is some gravity that's affecting the washes, the early washes. I'm using cobalt blue, cobalt turquoise, burnt sienna, yellow ochre, sepia, cad orange red. That's my palette, and kind of a spray bottle to keep things wet, and a hairdryer to dry things off. So if you have those things and you want to paint along, please join us. I do pause. Well, we'll see. If we have people painting along, there's a couple places that I will need to pause because I'm drying the painting off. If not, I'll just run it through. Let's see, anything else? I think that's it in a nutshell. So what I'll do is I'll share my screen with you, ask everybody to mute. I do have the chat open in case you have questions as we move along. But I'm going to start.
Could you show a picture of the brushes? I've never heard of this, or some of them.
Well, Sablettes are very common. It's a round brush. I'll show you. I have them with me here.
Yeah, I may know it's from a different name. I don't know.
Right. I don't have my cat's tongue, but it's basically like a flat that has a point. This is one of the flats I'll be using. The cat's tongue has a point to it. It actually looks something like a cat's tongue.
I have one of those.
Then the Sablette looks like this. This brand they don't make anymore, but you can find similar brushes like this at Blick or wherever you do your art supply shopping. And I have a couple of sizes of those brushes.
And what
then
are you
a
calling
mop brush.
And what are you calling these? Just
well, they're called Sablettes.
This is called a Sablette with the point.
Yeah.
Oh, I've never heard that term before.
They're trying to emulate a sable, right? Because of it, the way it holds water. Okay. So someone in marketing decided Sablette will make that connection, and it's how I see them at the art store. Then I also have a mop brush, a quill that I use to do some of the bigger washes.
Okay.
All right. So I get right into it. I have a paper on the board, and I start by doing a little drawing and showing you some of the proportions of the figures, and we go from there. I'm going to share my screen with you, and we'll get started. Optimize, share.
Gary, what brand paints do you use?
Oh, I use a variety, and it seems to change once in a while. So currently I'm using a lot of Sennelier, which is a honey-based pigment. And I like that. Winsor Newton, I like because they have that massive size, and I can just, it goes forever. All right. Any other questions before I Lunch.
Nope.
Today, our project involves doing some figures. We're going to be painting a beach scene later on, but we're going to start by looking at the figure, manipulating the strokes so that we can obtain different figures and ways to make these figures more interesting, either through things that they're holding, poses they're taking, reflections, all sorts of stuff. So the first thing we need to consider is, what is proportion? What is the basic proportion of the figure? And this applies to any figure that we're doing, whether it's a beach scene or a city scene or any sort of scene. Proportion. Well, the Greeks told us that the proportion is, for an average adult, 7.5 heads tall, using the head as a measuring unit. Let's start with the torso, however. And I'm starting with pencil and paper first. This is watercolor paper. It's just a painting that didn't work out that I turn over and repurpose. So on to the torso. This is usually the sequence that I take. I look for the shoulder line, the hip line, the average size of the torso, the basic size. Then I'll put a couple of legs. I envision this figure to be walking towards us. Very typical pose. We can use that in just about every sort of painting that we do. This, the arm coming down, the arm going back. And last but not least is the head. The head gives us a lot of information. It can tell us the age of the subject. It can tell us the direction the subject's looking. It can tell us things about the pose, etc. We can imagine a line coming down the middle. That would be the spine, the hips, the shoulders. So there's a lot of information compacted into these few lines. It's kind of a stick figure, yes, but it's a good place to get started. So how was my proportion? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.5. So maybe a little short. Why 7.5 heads? It's just something that they came up with. But in essence, what that's saying, that formula is saying, is that the adult head related to the body size is rather small. If, for example, we use the same size of head and make our figure much smaller, same sort of pose, about half the length, a little more than half, same size. Everything is made smaller except for the head. Now, on first glance, this reads as a child, right? So in relation to the proportion, the adult head is noticeably smaller related to the body than if we're looking at a child. And as we start to get into this, you'll notice it more and more. Let's do an infant, kind of a toddler. It's playing with something on the beach, probably. Maybe a bucket. Same size of head, but now it reads as a toddler. And look at how small everything else has become relative to the body. Okay, holding a shovel. A toddler. So that is an idea about proportion. Of course, there are other ideas onto good proportion for the legs, good proportion for the shoulders, arms, etc. But we're not going to drive ourselves crazy with measuring. We're going to eyeball it and do the best that we can. The way to get very good with proportion is through repetition and not through mathematics. Just learning to use your eyes and see in your subject things that will help you understand. Okay, so this is drawing the figure. Pretty good idea of proportion. I don't know what the formula is for a child or an infant, but you get the idea just with these 3 examples. Let's look at some ways we can create movement. We have something started here that can help us with movement. To do that, I'm going to use a brush. Kind of small brush to help me get started. Has a good point. And let's just use any old color. I'm using sepia. And let's start with, we're going to be looking at a figure standing, walking, running. How about that? And we'll use our adult proportion. The reason I like doing this with the brush starts to get me ready for painting the figure. And I like to paint the figure with a simplicity and sort of a calligraphic feel. He's raving to a friend. How about that? He's holding a sign. It's a lifeguard. Okay, let's try walking. So everything is moving when the figure starts walking. And let's try to put a couple poses here. We're going to be doing a walking pose. So let's start with pencil. Let's think about the angle of the back, the angle of the hips, one leg coming out, the other leg kind of moving back, body pitched forward, the arms are balancing the body, and head sits on top. Now the head can be kind of pitched forward also. I usually put the head last because it helps to direct the pose or give it a little more nuance. So we start with the torso, right? And the leg coming off the torso. And I add the different parts. I break the stroke so you get an idea of where the joints are. And I'm not a fan of putting feet, especially if the figure's animated. I think it almost always looks better if the body is not really anchored to the ground. Okay, and then we can put the head. And I'm putting the head just a little forward, just a little smaller. walking pose. And let's put a hat. There we go. So this is standing, walking. How about running? Notice how the body moves from a straight up and down, starting to tilt forward along this line. Running is going to be even more of that sort of exaggeration. So let's put the body at a very strong angle. And you see my pencil lines. I make them kind of light, but just to illustrate, usually I don't draw the pencil for the figure. Usually I just start with the brush. This gives you an idea of how that line is now much more at an angle. The arms are further apart, the legs are further apart. Let's see what that looks like. Start with the torso. And a leg coming off. Calf. Another calf. Arm coming out. Economy of strokes. And the head very pitched forward. That person is really running, really moving. Notice how the change in the angle. This one just on one leg, balancing by putting that arm way out. Little idea of the hand. And yes, he needs a hat. Pointed down. He's kind of watching the ground in front of him. So the hat can be not only give us a context of what the activity might be, but also it directs the head. So we can use that to our advantage also. Okay, let's try. Well, let's review. We have some idea of proportion, some idea of how to animate the figure. These things go for just about any time we might use the figure. Let's look at a few beach pictures, and why not use the ones we're doing today? Give us an idea of what might be a context, putting okay, so some places we see individuals like this, other places we see groups. So let's start by just loosely indicating some, you know what? Let's not use the pencil. Let's forego the pencil. And I'm going to show you a way to do figures with the brush, also a way to, an effective way to paint groups of figures. So sometimes we see individual figures, sometimes we see groups. Let's try a group pose. I'm using the same sienna. I'm not sienna. This is sepia. And I'm going to do just a couple of blobs. Connecting the blobs. Making some a little bigger, and then I'm going to put a blob off to the side here. So at this stage, they don't look like much, really. Well, let's add some legs to the blobs. They can be various. You don't have to count the legs. It doesn't have to be 8 legs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I've got 6 legs here. Oh, 7. Okay. And then this blob kind of walking away, maybe. What's next? Arms? Do we need arms? Maybe just on this end figure, or something like that. But we do need heads, so let's put heads on these blobs, and we can now make our blobs have a little more interaction. I'm gonna make this one kind of tall. Right, some appear to be looking one direction, some another direction. We can shape that too by, there's that hat. This poor blob kind of walking away, dejected. Pretty quickly those stories happen. And I think it's fun. Let's put some shadows, building on our work from last week. Shadows really make the subject come alive, start to give us an idea of the direction of the sun. Just make everything a little more interesting. Well, they're not wearing any clothes. We can change that too. I go back for some stronger paint. And okay, let's give this fella some shorts. Maybe he's got his arm up on a shoulder and hat. It's getting a little frisky. And here is someone, we're seeing someone from the back now. Gonna give them sort of a sundress, I guess. And a little darkness in the hair. Give this guy a bucket. This guy a fishing pole. Now we have a group of fishermen or fishing folk standing on the beach. And let's try, a youngster who's really excited about going for fishing for the first time. He's got his pole. Maybe a little dog too. Why not? Everybody's going fishing. We'll put a little shadow. So we start to make a story or a scene or a context. The context is going to kind of speak to the pose. You know, if people are standing around having a drink, they've got their fishing poles. You can kind of guess that, okay, these are folks getting ready to go fishing or do some sort of activity like that. Sometimes we'll show like just one figure. This will be a child also. Kind of just standing around, holding a bucket. Ready to build a sand castle. Something like that. And we might put a reflection. You know, if she's in the shallows, in the water, certainly we can put this reflection. Another common beach scene is, you know, people, especially young folks, running around. Let's just do a small figure in the distance. Start with the torso. That's little Gary running to the waves. That can be reflected too. And what else? Let's see. How about a figure that's laying down in the sand? Let me try to imagine that. Torso. Okay. This is from my memory banks. I'm not sure how it's going to come out. I'll try it anyway. Here's one case where I'm probably going to put the feet. Does he look like he's in the sand a little bit? Well, let's give him, maybe a Speedo. Oops, no, these are going to be shorts. Yeah. And a little stronger hat. Well, looks like he's face down. Sort of like that. Feet sticking up, hands coming out. Maybe he's got a cold beverage by his head. Just laying down in the sand. How do we paint a distant crowd? That's pretty easy. Remember our blob? We just make them a little smaller. There's a distant crowd. Yes, you can put a few legs, but you really don't need a lot of details for those distant figures. So this is some basics about figure: proportion, animation, context, and that includes a lot of things. The context includes the types of poses we might see, clothing, shading, etc.
Or Megan, if you wanted to. No big deal.
Okay, well, let me just talk a little bit about this before and answer any questions you have. There's some interesting things at work here. As I said, these are all figures that I've come to sort of put in my library, right? Things that I'm comfortable painting, that I've painted quite a bit before, so they come out smoothly and without a lot of effort. But this came about through a lot of repetition. I typically will go to coffee shop or a skating rink or a place like this and sketch. And this is a big part of building up your library, is finding poses that you can replicate relatively easy. And with a brush, do it in a few strokes, capture the essence of the pose. If you can do that with a few of your figures, that's really all that we need. A couple other things I'd like to point out is there's a little psychology that we can use too. For example, our group of figures. If we put a single figure to the outside of that group, or show a group and then a single figure in the distance or closer to us, we create a sort of tension that way. And that's very useful in painting, to give a little more focus to that individual and create some curiosity about your subject. And another thing that we use, and I don't know if would really be called a cheat, but when we create objects that are similar, and this goes for figures too, if we show one or two figures with clarity, we can put a bunch of vague figures in proximity to those two figures. And by assimilation, anybody who looks at the piece is going to understand, oh, those are also people, but they're in the distance. We don't have to be too detailed or too colorful with those figures. We need some clarity in main figures, but we can get away with a lot with figures that are on the periphery. That's what I'm trying to say. Any questions before we do a painting of these figures?
Looks clear.
Yeah, I mean, this is a really good practice if you're interested in starting to include figures in your painting. It's a great way to start with a single color, a single brush, and just do sheets of figures, whatever sort of context interests you, whether it's like this, fishing, beach scenes, athletics, coffee shops, anything like that. Once you start to do them, you start to build up your library.
Great.
Okay. So I'm going to back out of this. I'll just put this one and share this one. And then we're going to do, together now, we're going to do a painting of this beach scene, which of course is more involved, but you'll see that there's a clear relationship to how we build up the figures, how we clothe them, how we use color to bring a little excitement to the main figures, and so forth. So what I'll do is I'll play this through, and there's a couple points where I dry off the painting. I'll just pause and hold the video for a few minutes. It's not absolutely necessary to have it bone dry, but I do dry off the painting at a couple points. I've had this issue before where my QuickTime freezes. It's easy to start again. Just going to try this a couple times. Okay. I'm going to have to restart my QuickTime. Just give me a second. Can prepare another piece of paper while I'm getting started here. Okay, here we go. Share, and now you should be able to see it. And I'll go ahead and start. Okay, a new piece of paper, taped down. Got paint, pencil, brushes, water, lizard, and I'm looking at the exercises we did earlier, working on figures, proportion, animation, context, and then the tonal study we just finished doing, organizing these elements, getting an inspiration from an image or nature, and performing the watercolor. So let's put this where we can see it, and let's start to work on the subject. So we've gone through some of it, a good part of it already. We start with that horizon line. We look at the line of the distant mountains, some of the lower mountains, right? Coming in. Then we have this beautiful shape of the tide also coming in. Zigging and zagging back into the painting. Great compositional thought here to use that to carry us back into the painting. We have some figures, our main figures, lining up, I would say just the right amount above the bottom and inset from the sides, so they're nicely in the center. That's something I look for with any photograph. And we can start to place the distant figures. They seem to line up on different levels, some very distant, but we're not going to draw those. So very little in the drawing to speak of, right? Most of this is going to happen with brush and paint. And that's the next thought is I know how I want to approach it in terms of light and dark. But I want to start with some of the lighter notes. The lighter notes being the sky and this light blue that comes through the water area. Some of the distant sand and mist back here. So that's where we'll start, by painting some of that stuff. My palette is dirty. What do I want to use? What does the photograph suggest? Some variety of blues, a little bit of cerulean in the sky, a little cobalt through here, a little bit of the ultramarine in the back, warm sand that has a bit of lavender to it. So blue is really permeating the painting. Into that we have some warm figures, dark warm figures. So that'll be a nice contrast. We have lavender, turquoise, cobalt, ultramarine. And for the sand, we have some yellow ochre, some burnt sienna. For the figures, we have burnt sienna and some of this cad orange red. So to start, I'm going to mix up a few colors. Let's mix up some of the sand color here. I want it to be rather bright. Some of the blues here. We'll start with that cobalt. A little bit of turquoise with that cobalt blue. Just a little bit. Okay. And in the sky, it's a more cobalt, a little grayer, a little warmer. Some lavender. Let's lift up that green. We don't want that coming into the sky. Cobalt. Perhaps a little yellow ochre to start it off. In the sky. Yeah, something like this. So we start in the sky, just across this area here. We carry all the way to the top. Remember, we're painting our lightest hues, so we really don't need to go that dark. A little bit of blue. That's going to drop down, going to fade down, come down a little bit. Then I want to do the same thing into this water area.
Gary, are you painting flat?
Kind of hitting the light notes here.
No, I'm about 30 degrees, Joe.
Thanks.
So I'm going to start with this very pale, weak cobalt and a little bit of turquoise. I'm going to start to paint the bright notes to the water. Not much gray here. I like that turquoise feeling. And same time, I'm going to paint a light hue to the sand, just a light warm, not the final color. Just to kind of soften out that edge of the turquoise. Okay. Light, very light colors, very light colors. Let's play with the figures a little bit. Well, maybe not just yet. They're going to be our dark colors. So we need to let this dry. And let's just think about what we're doing here. Maybe it's a good opportunity to add some. No, we'll add that later. We've established our light notes in the sky, in the water, giving a little foundation color to the sand. Eventually this is going to be darker, and the hillside is going to be darker also. But I wanted to get some soft edges there, here and there, if I could. Now I'm going to put just a pale blue to the background, taking some of this pale blue right through here. Just to knock back the white a little bit. Then we let this dry. Okay, so at this point is when I would take out my hair dryer to speed things up and dry this off. And while you're drying your painting, I'll just talk about a couple things related to this first stage, which is to kind of set the high notes. I mentioned that, and by high notes, I mean the lighter areas of the painting. Some of that bright blue that's in the water will remain unchanged. Some of the light color in the sand that's towards the back, that will remain relatively unchanged. And the sky is set, and putting some warm tones where I plan to paint cooler tones later on. So adding some yellow ochre to the mountain range, for example, helps me to create a nice gradient in the sky, but also gives me a little bit of substance for painting the mountain that we see in the background. And it starts to make me, when I do a painting like this and I establish these early layers, helps a lot with confidence going forward, because I can start to see in this melange of colors the beginning of my painting. And when you can start to see your painting emerging from these colors and lines, you have more confidence, and you're apt to be a little bolder with color, a little bolder with edges, and so forth. So this it's a quiet step into the painting. It's not a bold step into the painting. And we've knocked back some of the whites, established the sky and some of the light tones in the water. And that was the primary goal. we're setting the stage in effect. We're not doing, going to be doing a lot of um, uh, concentration in the background. We're going to keep it kind of vague, and that helps us to bring out the figures in a more effective way. So everything is kind of focused on the eventual appearance of our figures. Any questions so far?
I think you're good.
Well, if you're ready to move on, just give me a thumbs up. Otherwise, I'll just pause it here for a moment. I'll point out the colors I have on my palette so I give you a little more reference. I use yellow ochre for just about everything, and that sits up here. Cadmium yellow light, burnt sienna. This is a color called cadmium orange red that's made by Holbein. I haven't seen it in another make, and so I use that for something in the shorts or in faces and things like this. Next to that is alizarin crimson. Below that is a color called lavender, and I use Holbein lavender also. It's got a bit of white. If you don't have lavender on your palette, you can use cobalt blue and a little bit of white and get very close to it. This is cobalt turquoise. Below that, cobalt blue. And below that is ultramarine blue. Below that is Payne's gray. And then I've got some neutral tint and some white on the bottom of the palette. It's not a beautiful palette. It's very beat up, and I always leave the older colors to dry in the palette because I like to start from, usually I like to start with leftovers. This is a rather bright beginning for me in this painting. And that's about it. So I'm going to go ahead and start up again. We're going to be working from the back to the front, starting with the mountain and gradually working forward to the shore, drying it off once more, and then placing figures. Oops, I don't know how that happened. Go back. Here. The distance, so I'm taking a little more ultramarine blue with a little bit of neutral tint to gray it. I'll make a mark to see how it moves, if it moves. Looks okay, yeah. So I'm going to start to paint to the shape of these hills. Something like that. Then as I bring it down, I'm switching to a weaker mixture, more water. So that I get a nice soft transition. We can even darken it a little bit up above, put a few touches of color. Darker means less water. I really like to work with gradients, so when I see them in nature, I get very excited. Okay, let's now look at the sandy area. We're going to start a little darker down below, and as we work higher, we're going to get lighter. Some of this burnt, this is yellow ochre with a little lavender, a little bit of blue in everything. Okay. As I start to work up, naturally, brush becomes a little paler. The color becomes a little paler. Starting to look a little more at my tonal study. Okay. Just adding a little bit to this blue to the lower section. Want that gradient to be a little stronger. I think that's good. Blue in everything. Let's take a smaller brush and grab some of those distant mountains. There we go, a little darker. Not a lot. And we start to get those distant hills. Also coming down here. Like that. We can even start to paint little blobs for people. Well, let's try our first figure. We're going to mix some warmer hues up here. Yellow ochre, cadmium orange red. Let's paint one right here. Gonna just jump right in. And head about here.
I'm going to put in a little darker color, some of the lavender blue, and a neutral tint, burnt sienna. Let's just try, well, let's make it more of a ultramarine blue, burnt sienna. Not everything, just where the shorts would be or some of the clothing. Let's do the next figure. Burnt sienna, a little bit of cad orange red. Right here. Start with the body. Torso, I should say. Hips. And leg. It's just a little wet. There's a little bleeding. It's okay with me. This arm comes out a little bit. And then the head, kind of at an angle. I'm also going to put some of this blue color into it, just into the center of the mark, and let the color spread out. Like that. Another one. Burnt sienna. Torso. Kind of a long, skinny profile torso. Some bright red where the shorts will eventually be. Leg coming out, coming down. Head. And some of that same blue on top while it's wet, just through here. Even into the bright red shorts. Our little figure. Same process. We're going to put her right about here, kind of crossing in front of Mom is a good idea. Torso. legs. Oops. And head. Extended arm. And again, some of that blue through the front here. Okay, so all these figures connected. Ideal. It's really ideal. We could lift out a little thing for the arm. Sometimes lifting out is a good way to do it simply. Other times it's nice to paint that. So we'll leave that. We'll paint the one that's down below. Like the naturalness of the figures, the way that they meet together. I'm going to go up above and paint with a little paler warm color. That means a little more water.
I'll pause it here for a minute. These are our major figures, and they do a number of things. They give us an interesting combination of poses. I mentioned that they're connected. The trio is connected. The little girl doing the cartwheel is isolated. She becomes the superstar in this whole painting because she's by herself and everything else is kind of connected, whether it's these three figures in the foreground or the background figures. They're more like the chorus, and the star of the show ends up being this isolated figure, which is good because it's a really fun pose, and it adds a smile to everybody's face that sees it. They just love the pose. Have a look at how the figures are built up basically as silhouettes. That's an important thing to consider is, yes, we see individual parts to the body, we see clothing, we see a lot of things that are different, like different colors or different shapes, but painting it as one shape makes it easier and actually makes the painting or the figure stronger. So even though there's a little accent of red or blue or lavender in my figures, I'm thinking of them as silhouettes. Silhouettes are just easier to paint. And they don't have to have a lot of character at this point. We're going to add brighter colors. We're going to add light and shadow to those figures. But this is the first stage, is to kind of get that silhouette down and finish it to the point where you're happy. Like if you want more division between the figures or more character to one or two of them, go ahead and add those things while the figure is in this state. But also know that you can do that at a later point. You don't have to finish them at this stage. The background figures end up being a lot easier, much closer to the blobs that we painted early on. So we'll proceed with those after we kind of finish what we want to do in these main three figures. And I really recommend that strategy when you're adding figures to your painting, is consider main figure and the chorus or supporting. Think of it as main actor and supporting actor. We need both, but definitely we give a little more attention, a little more focus, a little more presence on the stage to those main actors.
Okay, Gary, you got about 30 minutes.
Okay. Well, I need 17, so let's start.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
I might just mix the whole color right here. They're going to be stopping about here. Their head's about the same. Right. The little figures are tough. These distant figures are just blobs, really. We kind of group them based on association. I'm going to put one more figure here. A bigger figure. Walking away. And as these figures go further back, they get a little bluer and a little paler. Here's another one that's relatively close. Distant figures, just dots. Dots and dashes back here. I'm going to take some of this same gray here and create a little dry brush. Indicating some waves or sand, breeze across the water. Just some way to generate a little texture. I think that's good enough. Let's try some reflections. These reflections about the same color as our subject. Burnt sienna, a little bit of ultramarine blue. Just think in reverse. Okay. Fade off the mark. We don't have to paint everything. I'm going to try the same thing for reflections here in the sand. It's pretty well dry now. A little warmer. And I do paint them all the way to the bottom. Like this. Let's put the bucket, little turquoise bucket. Put some red as a kind of shadowish color while this is wet. And I'll just drag out a little bit of color. To make it feel shiny. Then we let this dry for a moment. Okay, we're going to finish off the painting with a few little additions. I'm taking some neutral tint, some ultramarine blue, some thicker paint. And for example, we can put a shirt maybe a little more greenish blue. I'm just following what I see in the photograph, but you could really do anything in terms of the clothing. We're painting right on top of the figure. I'm taking some more neutral tint, put the little blue into everything, even the color that we perceive as black. I'm putting a lot of blue to the shirt and a little bit into the hair. And I want to put some of that strong red into the shorts. It's almost a fluorescent red, but I don't have that. Well, I guess we'll put a dark swimsuit on the figure in the background as well. And how about a bright hat for my little darling? Here we go. Maybe these mid-ground figures need something as well. Darker shorts. Bright red bag. So we're just carrying some of the colors that we were using and the figures in the foreground, carrying it to the background a little bit. Makes the painting a little more colorful, a little more dimension also. And that can go on and on and on. It's all dependent on where we want to stop. Maybe a few highlights as this painting winds down. Highlights will be, I'm going to use color named Jaune Brilliant, which is a white that has some yellow ochre or some kind of yellow. I take it right out of the tube, as you can see. And there's some places for some highlights here. The back of the leg, catching a little highlight. Anything else? How about this guy has a little highlight on the shoulder, highlight on the forearm. Highlight on the shoulder. some of that bright red. The edge of the suit. Just want a little highlight there, not everywhere. Right. On the shoulders of some of the distant figures. Dots. Dashes. Make the sun a little stronger and bring a little form to the figures. We really don't need that in the distant figures. Through here, these main figures, certainly. Some things I forgot, maybe a little reflection. Water. I think that will do it. If we were to sign, we can use some of this red. We're using that in abundance in our painting. I would look for an empty corner, something down here. Not too big. It's going to fade in a little bit. Okay. There we go. Day at the beach.
Great.
Okay,
Thank you,
that's it
Gary.
in a nutshell.
Looks great.
Yeah, I can hardly wait for summer.
Me either. It's been
I see my
chilly.
I see my swimsuit, but it hasn't been used in a while. Any questions about figures in particular?
Well, I never would have attempted the little girl doing the cartwheel. That was
Yeah,
brilliant.
well, if you look at it as shapes instead of a figure, it becomes much easier.
Yeah. Yeah, it's awesome.
Okay,
Well, thanks, Gary.
you're very welcome.
It was
And
great. We got lots of compliments.
if you have any questions or need anything else, just let me know. But
Well, they love your figures for sure.
yeah,
Thanks, Gary.
years
Look
of
forward to
practice.
look forward to Friday. And if anybody's interested, we still have a couple spots. So
Can I have a question? This is Emily to
Yes.
Gary. I'm looking forward to your workshop. And do we need to do any sketching at all? And we just bring a blank paper and just follow you, correct?
Yes, you don't have to sketch ahead of time. There'll be plenty of time for that. We do a little bit of sketching to start off and a few of those drills. So you don't, all you have to really prepare is just have the materials with you. And if you have the image either printed out or on another device, that's quite helpful. I do put it on the screen, but some people like to see it in a larger format.
Yeah, I usually print it out, but I really look forward. It's what you did is so beautiful because I really need to loosen up my painting.
Okay, I'm going to get you to become very loose with your painting, that's for sure.
Look forward to. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily.
Any more questions?
Gary, is the image for tomorrow's, in the next days, already furnished somewhere?
Yeah,
Joe has them and he's sent them out, I believe.
yeah,
As
I
it-
sent them out this evening, probably about 5 o'clock this evening.
Okay,
There's
thank you.
three images and one for each day.
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right. Any more comments, questions? I think Gary's tired. He's in Boston, and I think it's getting close to midnight for him.
Yeah.
So thank you, Gary. That was great.
Thanks, Gary.
Yeah, my pleasure, guys.
All right.
See you soon.
Thank you, Liz.
Bye.
Night,
Thank you.
everyone. See you next
Good night.
month. Good night.
Good night.